I've been playing Symmetra for close to half my life at this point. That's not an exaggeration. The first time I played Symmetra I was 11, and today I'm 19. In that time, I can only think of one period where Symmetra felt good. Sim players seemed happy, people weren't complaining about her any more than usual, and her stats were fairly in line all things considered. She wasn't even a dominant pro pick. Of all the heroes in Overwatch, very few come close to the turbulent mismanagement that Symmetra has undergone. I'm Halix, I'm one of the highest ranked sim players on NA, and at the time of writing the script I am both the only GM Symmetra main and the highest ranked sim player on North American servers. I know the ins and outs of this hero to a frankly worrying extent, and I'm absolutely appalled by the way that she's been managed. I've been writing multi-thousand word essays about Symmetra for about 6 years now, and a few months ago I made a video rant talking about why her rework failed. I can't seem to stop talking about this hero, so I'm going to add yet another magnum opus to the pile and talk about how Symmetra has been destroyed at a systemic level. So unfortunately we need to start with a history lesson. Symmetra was released as one of the only 4 original support heroes in Overwatch. Yes, I do consider her support. Her initial kit, as we all probably remember, had a short-range lock-on beam, piercing orbs, 6 turrets, a small health increase for allies, and a teleporter from spawn. Symmetra at this time functioned as a prototype brig. Her job was to provide area denial and safety for allies, which he did questionably. Symmetra's lock-on beam made her a threat at close range, and with this in mind, the devs gave her a large head hitbox as a weakness. This isn't important right now, but it will be later. Frankly, there's not much to talk about with Sim 1.0 because she wasn't around for very long and her history is very lost. Sim 2.0 was exceedingly similar to 1.0, the main changes to her kit being a photon barrier, a deployable shield, and a shield generator, an alternative to teleporter which would provide allies with an additional 75 health. 2.0 brought in a lot of new players, especially support players. The 2 most prominent Symmetra content creators at this time, Luminum and Hashizora, were both notably Mercy players. Outside of her growth within the support player base, Symmetra also found a home with disabled players and the LGBTQ community. I wish there was more to say about 1 and 2.0, but during their existence they both received zero balance adjustments. Symmetra 3.0 was introduced to the game in the summer of 2019. Her lock-on beam was removed in favor of a laser pointer, similar to Zarya. Her orbs are now much faster, and instead of having 6 turrets, she now only has 3. Her new ultimate, Photon Barrier, is a gigantic wall that covers the entire map. Most interestingly, her teleporter was moved to her E ability slot, and can now be used by allies to cross long distances. 3.0 was met with mixed reactions, primarily due to her role swap and new primary fire. Symmetra, who had found a home with disabled players and people with poor aim, suddenly became as aim-intensive as any other DPS hero. This effectively killed her usability for anyone who couldn't aim, making a stark decrease in popularity. Moving Symmetra into the damage roster also alienated her primarily support player base. During this time, Symmetra encountered a glaring issue. Teleporter required a button input from allies. The interact key, a new button introduced for Symmetra, was not automatically bound for all players. This meant people would often enter games without the ability to utilize teleporter. This built a layer of distrust between sim and non-sim players, as sim players couldn't trust their allies to use teleporter, and allies, frankly, never wanted to have a Symmetra on their team. Notably, teleporter could also not be placed on railings, making it incredibly awkward to use. Due to a bug with Reinhardt's charge, Symmetra's ability to use TP and spawn was also removed, a bug that persists on some maps to this day. After a failure to find popularity among the general player base, Symmetra 3.0 received her first minor rework. This ushered in the age of Sim 3.1, Infinite Teleporter. Infinite Teleporter was an introduction aimed at making Symmetra easier to play with. The devs believed that by making Teleporter last forever, players would be more willing to utilize it, as before they may or may not know when Teleporter would despawn or deactivate. Unfortunately, due to the distrust that had already been built up between Symmetra players and the rest of the community, this is far from what actually happened. Teleporter was primarily used in 2 ways after the rework. Either it was placed between point and spawn, working as a taxi, or it was used for Symmetra and immediately destroyed to maximize cooldown efficiency. This rework was fairly unpopular and Symmetra players asked for a revert or another rework. She would receive one in 2022. In the Overwatch 2 beta, Symmetra received her second minor rework, bringing in the age of Sim 3.2. The main points of this rework was a revert on teleporter and significantly faster orbs with lower damage. Symmetra between this time and her next rework was actually quite good. Fast Orb brought in a lot of flexibility for Symmetra and, with innovations from her players, allowed Sim to be played not only as a brawl hero but also as a flanker and a poke harasser. Due to turret's high combined damage potential and the safety that Teleporter provided, Symmetra could efficiently get into the enemy backline and pummel them with orbs or telebombs for kills. She could also get into the enemy backline and utilize turrets as a tool to discourage dives, giving her safety and allowing her to take on a niche role as a powerful off-angle projectile DPS. While more flexible, Sim was still somewhat underpowered and received a few minor buffs between this and her next rework. I seriously cannot understate how good this era was for Symmetra. For once, it felt like sim players, the rest of the community, and the devs were all happy with her. She wasn't overperforming, she wasn't struggling, she was catering to her one-trick pony player base by being a flexible hero with a lot of breadth, and her skill expression was at an all-time high. This was until Symmetra 3.3. Turrets now provide sonar, and Symmetra heals when hitting barriers and shield health. Two of the most bafflingly stupid balance changes I have ever seen for a hero.
What?
In addition to this, Symmetra also received 100 damage orbs. Okay, let's get the obvious out of the way. Sonar is useless for Symmetra. Due to turrets' damage being nearly halved, they no longer function as a damage tool nor area denial. You quite literally have to stand next to a turret for nearly 2 seconds for it to have done a melee worth of damage to you. Because of this, Symmetra's flank and poke playstyle struggled. Due to higher damage orbs with the potential to two-shot, she still survived and did quite well even with the changes. Notably, because orbs did exactly 200 damage with 2 directs, even a single point of healing would prevent a kill, hurting Symmetra's overall lethality. As for her shield vamp changes, well, these are also useless. Symmetra averages about 100 healing per match from her passive, which is the astounding equivalent of just under 2 seconds of Mercy's beam on her, over the course of an entire match. Obviously, Symmetra did not actually struggle within brawl comps previous to this change, making the introduction of shield vamp even more questionable. Most heroes with shields or shield health are played within brawl comps such as Ryan, Ramatra, and Zarya. Those who aren't either have a minimal amount of shield health, such as Ball, or were heroes who simply played so far out of Symmetra's range that she would never actually be beaming them, such as Lifeweaver, Zenyatta, and Sigma. At the time of this change, Symmetra was also the only DPS hero in the game with shields or shield health. Okay, whatever, sonar turrets are useless, but at least we have 2 shots with orbs, right? Well, Symmetra was undeniably the hero hit hardest by the DPS passive rework, due to her reliance on healing, inability to proc the passive, and her balance around the 200 health breakpoint. Symmetra fell nearly 10% in win rate after the introduction of the DPS passive. Obviously she was buffed, and then hotfix nerfed. We'll talk about this later. So for the past few weeks, Symmetra has been effectively unplayable at an all-time low pick rate and win rate, and her player base is, as usual, unhappy. Let's talk about what led us here. Symmetra was introduced as a low aim intensity support hero. By moving her to the damage roster, you alienated the player base who utilized her due to her accommodating kit and the players who played her for her supportive kit. This was the first step in dismantling her player base. I'm going to quickly talk about why role swaps are so damaging. Most players primarily play one role, so when you take a hero out of that role, you take the player base out of their comfort zone. For example, look at Doomfist. After being moved out of the damage role, we suddenly have a gigantic surge of Doomfist's one-trick ponies. This is in part because Doomfist players were removed from, I say this in quotes, home. And we have lost the other heroes that they usually swap to, such as Echo, Genji, Tracer, and so on. The same thing happened with Sim. A large part of our player base primarily played her, Mercy, Moira, etc. After being moved to a DPS roster, they lost their options and hence created a one-trick community. After being moved to the DPS roster, Sim released with a clunky and bugged TP that couldn't be placed on railings, broke constantly, would later be unusable in spawn, and would often be unusable by allies because they didn't have the interact key bound. This created layers of distrust between Sim players and the rest of the community. Sim players saw that people either wouldn't or couldn't use their teleporter, and because of that, they had to innovate a playstyle that utilized a more greedy TP. Infinite TP was introduced and hurt this greedier playstyle, but still failed at encouraging team cooperation, making Sim players unhappy and also doing very little to encourage people to actually use their teleporter. The playstyle that most Sim players were using at this time focused around Sim being greedy with their TP and breaking it as soon as possible. This made it so that allies would never be able to use TP, and they never learned how. Moving into Overwatch 2, things improved dramatically, until they didn't. Sim received changes that made no sense and pushed her into a supportive direction. At this time, we had also just received Lifeweaver, who sent another hardlight support clearly aimed at the LGBTQ community. Many Sim players who had been waiting for a support rework moved to Lifeweaver, causing a major exodus of Sim players. Supportive balance changes may make Sim players happy, but they do not cater to the majority of DPS players. This leaves Sim in a situation where the support Sim players have left for Lifeweaver, and the DPS players don't want to touch a quasi-support. The only people who want to play Sim are incredibly dedicated one-tricks. Despite her OTP community, Blizzard pushes Sim towards a niche playstyle with balance changes that only benefit her against Brawl. Okay, fine. Sim is a niche hero only meant to be played in some situations. Except she isn't. Every time Symmetra has benefited from the meta molding itself into her niche, she has been nerfed, as was seen during Double Shield and the brief Malga meta. Well, maybe she's just meant to be played by high coordination teams like in Pro Play. Also no, when Sim players fully utilize her kit, it's considered bug abuse. Well, maybe she's meant to be good in low elo. Also no, Sim can't be good in low elo because TP is too good in Pro Play. And she also can't be good in high elo because turrets are too strong in low elo. And she can't be good in a niche because, well, really who knows? Your guess is as good as mine, and she also can't be good in the hands of specialist because she's meant to be a niche hero. Simply put, Sim has been tied into knots. Let's go over it again, in bullet point form this time. 0 attempts were made at balancing support Symmetra. Moving Symmetra from a non-aim-intensive support hero into an aim-intensive DPS hero alienates her player base and makes her inaccessible. Moving heroes from one role to another creates a one-trick player base, see Doomfist. Upon moving Symmetra to the DPS role, they still balance her as a support and have moved her more towards a supportive playstyle as time has passed. This kills the interest of DPS players, further cementing her into having an OTP player base. I'm also going to toss this in here. When Symmetra was moved from a support to a DPS, she never received a rebalancing to her major weakness, her gigantic head hitbox. There's no reason for Sim, now as a DPS hero without a lock-on, to have such a big head. They balance Symmetra as a niche hero who's only meant to be played in certain situations by killing off innovation by Symmetra players, which, in combination with her aforementioned OTP player base, makes her effectively unusable. They introduce Lifeweaver as a new hard-lighted support who also clearly caters to Symmetra's player base, and that causes an exodus of Sim players. The hero rewards communication, but because Blizzard's unwillingness to enforce players to even bind the interact key, Symmetra players do not trust their teammates and are hesitant to attempt TP strategies. Teammates are unwilling to trust Symmetra players, and this builds a stigma around her. Symmetra can't be good in high elo because turrets are too strong in low elo, but she also can't be strong in low elo because TP is too strong at a competitive level. This leaves her strong nowhere, other than I guess like the 1 in 40 matches that she's used in pro play. Sprinkle in a healthy platter of TP bugs and clunkiness and you have a hero that no one wants to play. All this bothers me, but you know what really gets me? What really irks me more than anything else? Is that we're expected to work with our teammates. Blizzard should be well aware that Symmetra is probably the largest queer player base, and we're meant to work with our teammates that treat us like this. We're supposed to work with teammates who threw when we played 2.0, the teammates who throw currently. I'm supposed to coordinate with teammates who call me slurs in voice chat. I'm supposed to coordinate with teammates that want to call me slurs. Maybe this works for a hero like Ryan or Genji, but not Sim. People know I am gay from the second I open my mouth. People know from the second I pick this hero. And nothing that I ask of them in voice matters to them because they just think I'm less. It feels incredibly tone deaf and in some ways irresponsible that every single change Symmetra has gotten has basically been a little push into go into the voice chat, it will be fine. It won't be fine. Blizzard should be well aware. I don't understand where they think that this is going. I don't understand why they think trying to push us into voice is helpful to anyone. It's not. The only reason that Symmetra has maintained any amount of popularity is because she serves cunt on the ethereal plate. No hero has been designed to fail at this level. Symmetra has been destroyed systematically from the ground up, building a stigma around her and her player base. This has left a player base that feels confused, ignored, and desperate for an overhaul.